I'm way more confused than he is.
Welcome to the Entangled Health celebration series. You've just heard 13 voices talking at once. It sounds like chaos, but it isn't. It's entanglement. Different minds, different generations, different fields, and all crossing wires around the future of health. Today we're trying something different, an experiment within the experiment. Instead of our usual format, where you meet one guest and a deep dive into their work, I've woven together voices from the earlier conversations around a single thread, a story that keeps emerging across different experts, different disciplines, and different perspectives. And the idea is simple but radical. What if the best answers to the biggest questions don't come from one expert in one field, but from the entanglement itself, from the connections between the fields, between minds, between different ways of seeing the same problem? Before we start, the usual disclaimer: this is not a medical advice, and what you hear are personal takes, interpretations, working hypotheses. These are conversations between friends exploring frontier where science is still being written. Nothing you hear here represents any official position from any company or organization, and we are here in a personal capacity speaking our own truth. Now, here's something important. The goal of this episode is not to give you answers, it's to show you how answers emerge when we stop working in silos. When a quantum physicist talks to a biologist, when consciousness researcher sits with someone measuring tiny magnetic fields, and when people from completely different worlds realize they're actually describing the same phenomenon in different languages. So let's go.
So this is the entire pharma drug discovery value chain. So you start with an idea, you've got a disease that needs some kind of therapy or treatment. So you try to understand the molecular mechanisms of what is causing that disease.
This is Ravi Kirun describing the classical way we develop drugs.
And then you identify a chemical moiety, whether it's a small molecule or a peptide or a protein, that can change the functionality of that disease paradigm such that you get an outcome. And the outcome would be reduction of disease or curing of the disease so that the quality of life for the patient is improved.
Today's episode asks a question that might sound crazy to a doctor from 20 years ago. Maybe the body is not just only its biochemistry. Maybe the problems we are trying to solve, complex disease, drug discovery timelines, the mind-body connections, have become too entangled for classical approaches to handle.
But the question that we need to ask now, do we really solve the basic problem of healthcare and life science? Not really, because we just scratched the surface, right? Because we still need to understand what is antimicrobial resistance, right? What is the cancer? What is gene therapy? Stem cell research. These are all unsolved questions for us, right?
This was Gopal Karamur from IBM. Let's start with the wall. Modern medicine is sophisticated. We have genomics, proteomics, brain imaging, wearables, and yet we are stuck. Let's listen maybe to Gabriela from Quantinum, what she thinks.
So as an individual, you want to know what common causes make disease develop, what from our unique makeup contributes, what from our external environment contributes, what can help heal with or without external helping agents.
Let's look again at the classical development workflow.
You start from that, and then you develop a few molecule leads, molecules that you test in a hypothesis in an in vitro setting. And if the results there are relevant, then you take it to an in vivo setting with animals. With rats and mice and dogs and non-human primates as required. But there's always the yin and the yang saying you can cure a cancer in a mouse, but you cannot cure cancer in a human because human methodology and human disease is probably much different than even humanized mice which have that cancer.
So we do not want to treat animals, but we want to heal humans. And those are really super complex.
But having said that, at least you can use that kind of methodology to determine whether this molecule you're trying to develop is safe and effective. It doesn't have any major bad side effects and things like that.
So we try to speed up things with computation and artificial intelligence.
And this is a hugely difficult problem to solve, mathematically difficult. There are so many parameters to take into consideration. It's a huge number, which most of the time we can quantify and analyze individuals.
So we finally have our compound, but it is still a very long way.
So then you take it to a preclinical model and then to a clinical model where you do a phase 1, where you're testing the hypothesis in normal, healthy volunteers where you're just seeing whether this molecule has an effect or not. For that matter, every molecule has an effect, good or bad. In fact, to the extent that if you drink gallons and gallons of water, you could die. So, but having said that, that kind of testing is important, and because it's a regulated industry. Then you go to a phase 2 with patient population, and then to a large phase 3. So this whole process can take anywhere between 8 to 12 years, go from idea to the market. There's numbers all over the place, but let's say an average of it takes $2 billion to take an idea from the beginning to the market. And this is taking in all those molecules that have died in the process. It's an average.
But then if you take into consideration the interdependency influenced by different factors, genetics, environment, the choices we make, you might say that we are entangled.
So that word entangled is not poetry, it's mathematics, and a single patient's health depends apparently on thousands of variables that all influences each other. Classical computers just can't hold that in their head, and neither can human doctors. So what happens? We simplify, we ignore interactions, and we treat diseases as isolated problems instead of system problems, and we fail. So what about other technologies?
Landed up at Merck KGA's Silicon Valley Innovation Hub. And this was a real opportunity for me to really identify novel paradigm, game-changing technologies and bring them into the company and see how they could really modify and speed up. Because a mentor at Pfizer told me once that innovation is seeing patterns others miss. And I think that was the key, that I had the unique opportunity in Silicon Valley to identify novel game-changing opportunities.
And my strong belief is that we need a tool such as quantum computing to really go deep into the understanding of the biology, chemistry, and physics.
And when you think about the convergence of what is going on in the world today, quantum obviously is a big topic, AI and agents and so on, it's another one, but the new materials and robotics and nanorobotics and other things that are completely outside of my area of expertise, but potentially much more into the health industry. Oh, wow. What a time to be alive.
This is Sergio Gago, the CTO from Cloudera, and he's just fascinated by the way technology is speeding up.
Yeah, put all that together, a lot of huge disrupting technologies and scientific research. Right? Each of those by themselves could create an industrial revolution. And now you put these 10, 12 technologies and things that are happening exponentially faster. Every 6 months, there's a wow factor happening in the world. It's difficult even to keep up, right?
It is indeed a fast evolving field. Yeah, so fortunately, I like reading and I like talking to people, so I read a lot every day. I obviously read about advancing quantum technologies and keep up to date with the news. But I also read as much as I can about human biology and psychology with a focus on what shapes us today.
When we have been seeing in the last 10, 15 years in all areas of science and industry working together, it's both exciting and mesmerizing. And I like to think how our kids are going to live in the world in the future, what type of jobs they will have, and effectively, how will we live our lives? I cannot even start thinking about that. So maybe it is entangled health, but also entangled lifestyle.
But I also read as much as I can about human biology and psychology with a focus on what shapes us today, which probably suits the term entangled health, how these changes impact our bodies, what are the consequences. And I discovered, maybe just me who recently discovered, maybe this has been happening for a long time, but I'm part of a growing group of people who want to understand how we can stay healthy over the years, age healthily and happily, and build a better society, or at least try to do so.
Gabriela just said something crucial. We are part of a growing group trying to understand health differently. But here's the real question. How can we build that better society if we don't even understand ourselves? Let's hear what Eduardo Miranda explored. Eduardo is a composer and professor in computer music, and he has not only composed the opera that you hear in the background, but also has developed technology that lets us see our own neural patterns, our own brain states. And once you can see something, you can change it.
And I began to use machine learning to be able to distinguish between these different kinds of electrical brain waves that, try to classify them according to specific cognitive tasks that people were doing. Then I realized that it is not as easy as one may think it is. That we are very different from each other, Thomas. Our brains is like our fingerprint, right? We are very different, and trying to find common ground between people's brain is fiendish. It is really difficult. So then I kind of began to look into other techniques. For example, what if I could give stimulate to people to stimulate the brain somehow, and then use that for making people to train themselves to produce specific brain waves.
Eduardo enabled paralyzed musicians to perform together. You hear them in the background. How? How do you translate intention into action when the body won't respond? That's the question at the heart of what he discovered. And if you want to understand the actual mechanics, the details that matter, listen to our full conversation with Eduardo.
But what we created here was a way where four people were able to communicate between themselves. And that is actually...
that is the social component.
Exactly. They were playing with each other, even though they were not able to talk, they were not able to make gestures and so on, but they were paralyzed from the neck down. Thomas. I mean, they only had very little eye movement or mouth movement, right? But they were talking, they were communicating emotions to themselves.
When we ignore the mind, we miss half the healing power. So we have three walls: complexity, which we cannot compute, timelines we cannot meet, and a human dimension which we cannot measure. How do we break through these three walls? Let's meet the quantum sledgehammer. Quantum computing can finally hold complexity that classical computers never could. And there's one fundamental problem: aging, that sits at the root of nearly every major disease. It's systems entangled with each other. That's where Azalusia, a winning team of Saudi Arabia women, started. Let's hear a reach from the team.
It's because we, as people, as humanity, have came to realize that the root to most of our health problems actually is aging. For example, many diseases such as cancer are more prominent or show huge increasing as we age. So, for example, they say do more scanning after 40. And that's because something happens, something that we are interested in discovering what exactly this something. That's actually our question. What exactly is happening to our bodies after we pass, for example, 70 years? Suddenly, all of these diseases start to come to us. Why is that? So this question, we as a team think that it can be answered not only using traditional ways because they take forever, but by using the great strong power of machine learning and quantum. So Nujud can talk more about how quantum can be utilized for complex data and how it can help speed up the process of this analysis. But in general, it's basically that we have so much data that might have patterns that we, as humans, it's very difficult for us to analyze this data and come up with these patterns and understand them and make something out of them.
So we start with quantum computing. The work from Azalosia is still early research. So let's hear of a published result from IBM and listen again to Gopal.
And we have actually shown using our recent paper, the publication that we had with RIKEN, it's a Japanese research organization, that the method like sample-based quantum diagonalization, how these methods in conjunction with classical computer, supercomputer, can help solve the problem in 2 hours, which would otherwise take years to really solve only on the quantum computer, right? So I think this is also very fascinating from the drug discovery side, the molecular discovery.
2 hours instead of years. That's not just faster, that's another category of capability. There seems to be evidence that in some areas in healthcare and life sciences, quantum computing can help. The point is, it's not replacing classical computing, but it's augmenting it. Here's Gopal again.
No, totally. So for that reason, I mean, we conducted a webinar, which is available, I mean, just for the listeners who really want to know, deep dive into what is the possibility of each and every functional areas of drug discovery and development. Because I strongly believe when you say healthcare and life science is related to understanding disease mechanism, where the healthcare is related to the patient data. So the bridge between this healthcare and life science is a pharma company, right? Because this is where exactly the translational science happens, translational medicine happens, right?
Okay.
From that's what they call bench to bedside, right? You may be having a really nice basic research and all, but unless you put it into the practice, like put it into the FDA regulation, become that as a drug available to the patient, it's not helpful, right?
It's a second quantum sledgehammer. If you cannot measure it, you cannot optimize it. Quantum sensing lets us measure things that classical sensors have no way to detect. Let's hear Clarice D'Aiello, a pioneer in the field of quantum biology.
In my PhD, I worked with technological quantum sensors. The idea is that you can mathematically prove that if you use quantum objects like an electron as a sensor, your measurement is improved. In other words, the sensor quantumness enhances the measurement. I work with a very famous technological quantum sensor, which is a spin in diamond, in the material diamond. And a couple cool things about the sensor is that, one, it's a very good sensor of magnetic fields. 2, it works at room temperature. Its quantumness survives for long enough at room temperature to be useful. And 3, the fundamental quantum property that that the sensor uses to sense in a quantum enhanced way magnetic fields is superposition, electron spin superpositions.
Healthcare as a whole is changing nowadays, and we are seeing a lot of new things popping up because we can detect many things that we were previously not capable, calculate things that we were not capable, do cool stuff, yeah?
So quantum biology is real. Clarice showed us quantum effects are already happening in living cells. magnetic sensing at room temperature. But knowing it exists and being able to measure it are two different things. Let's hear Sadek's journey. His expertise in quantum sensing is the bridge between theory and detection, turning what Clarice described into data we can actually use.
And then I went to Helmholtz Institute, GSI, in Darmstadt, and then I did an ion trap experiment, basically localizing highly charged ions and doing fundamental experiments and measuring with the highest precision possible. The numbers that you throw around in this kind of experiments are mind-boggling. So in this time, because GSI has it's famous and it has a claim of fame in a specific type of therapy, which is proton therapy for cancer.
With accelerators, and then you just use the particles itself to destroy the cancer.
Yes, basically where it was invented. Yeah, and looking at them, that was where got me excited about applications of new deep tech and high tech stuff for healthcare. But nowadays, as our technologies advance, especially in sensing, I have the idea that sensing opens new doors for us. As we advance in our technology, as we advance in our manufacturing, we have started detecting signals that previously was not possible.
So we have two Sledgehammer: quantum computing that processes the unprocessable and quantum sensing that measures the unmeasurable. But there is still a gap. Even if you have perfect data and perfect computation, if different domains can't talk to each other, nothing happens. The silos are as much a problem as the science.
I work in an interdisciplinary field called quantum biology, and one of the big problems that we have is that we found out that people from different fields don't talk to each other, right? So I think that your solution to this problem is laudable, and I think that we should have more of this type of dialogue where people from bio talks to people from AI, talks to people from physics, talks to people from chemistry, right? And I think because I think that the nicest problems, the ones which are not incremental, are probably interdisciplinary. And interdisciplinarity is a buzzword. Everyone likes to say that they do interdisciplinary science. People like to say that they fund interdisciplinary science.
We talk about this later, I guess.
Right? And it's like a big lie. I mean, it's a big lie. Yeah. While students are still separated in departments, while departments are still departments, while in funding bodies, there are still funding bodies for chemistry, bio, and stuff. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's intrinsic to our system. We need a rehauling, and that's part of what we're trying to do in my current organization.
But breaking those silos isn't just about technology. It's about people. It's about building ecosystems where different kinds of knowledge can actually connect. John Barnes has been asking that question since 2014.
Yeah, so I think first thing I thought of was around the health of quantum and the ecosystem, and I think it was more almost like the mental health of quantum. So, where are we going? What do we want to achieve? How do we get there? Who's this for? And that kind of existential aspects of it.
And that's where the third part comes in. Maybe AI and machine learning are a translation layer.
Creativity is, I think, a very important human characteristic, and trying to get machines to simulate creativity, I think is a bit of a waste of time. But I think to get machines to help us to be creative, that is the key. Because at the end of the day, we need to think about humans, to think about ourselves, and not about terminating ourselves, but actually, making ourselves better people. And I think that technology are instruments for that.
Technology as an amplifier, not a replacement. That's the philosophy that actually works. So now we have the full stack. Quantum computing for modeling, quantum sensing for measurement, AI for translation and amplification, and community builders asking who this is for. That's the Sledgehammer. And it's starting to work. Samad Sandeep is proof of that.
So that's when I decided later that year that, I'm going to start my own company that's going to be focused on biological modeling. I think the main thing that I was interested in was I wanted to see if there were improvements that could be made in protein docking to start with. So I had heard about a professor at UC Davis who was looking at how yeast proteins or proteins, specifically extracellular proteins in yeast, could bind to nutraceuticals, so things like curcumin and whatnot. We looked at protein pruning as a way to identify binding sites before, or really blocking atoms that are blocking interesting binding sites before doing docking. And then did that. That was okay, but really what took off the company and made it a company rather than just a fun set of projects was we wrote about protein binding with regards to hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and how so this was the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and it was clear that these drugs don't really do anything. So we basically showed it does not do anything, but that paper got cited a lot because it was something that people were needing at the time. So that's how we got our first client at UC Davis Medical Center, and with my company If and Only If Technologies.
What happens when the wall comes down? Once we can measure everything, compute everything, and see everything, what do we find? The answer might surprise you. We don't find a machine, we find something much stranger.
But what did you learn from that? You learned that, drug discovery and development can happen with not just traditional ways of identifying a disease and develop a therapeutic for it, but you can also learn from traditional Chinese medicine. You have Ayurveda in India. And a lot of it goes back to another major point in drug discovery and development that we have not touched upon, and that's called the placebo effect. And so if you believe in something, even giving somebody water and they have the belief that the water that you give them is going to cure them, it's stranger than life fiction, but they have been cured. People have been cured. So there is a whole body response to something like this that does work, but of course you cannot scale it. You cannot promise somebody and charge them X amount of money for the water that you give them.
So that's interesting. Consciousness at the center and the power of mind. Let's see what we can do with that one.
I have learned to be careful in this space. There is a lion and crackpots stand on the other side. I have to put a no-fly zone with a large buffer zone around that space.
Okay, this was the quantum dragon. Let's be careful here.
But then if you're trying to bring some of these things into the normal pathway, then you have to have really pragmatic trials with pre-registered endpoints, and you have to look at how the mindfulness and everything of this digital phenotyping can actually benefit.
I'm way more confused than he is.
You mentioned aura, and I would say that, as you said, there are publications that speak about detecting biophotons, and we were not able to measure them because the signal is so faint. It's basically to most of our imaging systems undetectable, but now we can see them. And as we advance our technologies in sensing, I'm sure that they will be turning out into having different spectrums, colors, different intensities, as you said, and our ancient wisdom had this included in them. So basically, we have to be very careful not to believe anything, but we have to change our mindset to a state of open-mindedness to explore the things that we have basically disregarded up to now.
To truly navigate that no-fly zone, To tell the difference between legitimate frontiers and the crackpots, you need someone who spent decades in the exact places where science gets uncomfortable, which is exactly where Dean Radin has chosen to work.
So, I happen to pay attention to research in anomalies because truth is revealed by anomalies and not by conformance, or by conformity. It's anomalies rather than conformity. So I was attracted to things that didn't quite fit. And one of those things was parapsychological claims.
So where is the boundary between breakthrough and bullshit? Dean Radin has been studying that intersection for 40 years. The Dragon's no-fly zone protects the messy middle, and Dean Radin is the cartographer of that territory.
And so just when I was preparing to leave with my doctorate, I noticed that there was a job opening at Princeton University for a group there that was doing research on these kinds of phenomena, mind-matter interaction phenomena.
In fact, what the hell? If you've spoken to Dean Radin, I can tell you a human part of the story. I suspect your audience is more human than some of the scientists I deal with.
This is Paul Werbers, one of the pioneers of artificial neural networks.
When I was young, I really fiercely believed that the concept of the human soul was total nonsense, and psychic phenomena was even more total nonsense.
He's not a mystical thinker, and he's not alone in this belief.
So I applied, and I basically would have been given the job. I was qualified for it, but I was told and recommended that you don't want to do this as your first job. So don't start your doctoral career with a controversial topic, because that will taint you for the rest of your life. So I paid attention to that. So I went to Bell Labs instead and did conventional work. But I still remember that this was a very attractive topic because it was conventional science, or at least the epistemology of conventional science, being applied to things that were considered way out on the fringe.
If we live in a universe which is 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, if that's what the real universe is, just like what Einstein thought, it seemed as if that could not be reconciled with certain experiments.
And so at Bell Labs, I started doing those experiments. I took advantage of business travel to visit laboratories around the United States to talk to people and see what they were actually doing, the few people who were actually scientists doing this kind of work, and I became more and more intrigued. So I figured out a way to actually incorporate this a little bit into some of my Bell Labs work by looking at the mind-machine interaction.
But at the end of the day, yes, the experiments disagreed with common sense ideas of time. If you replace these ideas of time with time-symmetric models of the macroscopic objects you use in the experiment, the paradox will disappear. I've worked out the mathematics to show it's not impossible. You can be a hardcore realist and still believe in psychic phenomena, which is the other side of life. Because after 1967, I explored, and I think there's no doubt that the psychic phenomena are very real, that we do have what we call souls, that there is a kind of spiritual connection between us, and it is consistent with mathematical science.
And I learned that what has been irrationalized at the moment used to be our ancient wisdom, as you said.
I don't have a question as such, but all I would say is the future of healthcare is entangled. It's completely entangled with science and technology and humanity woven together.
For me, the personal convincing point was when I was doing an experiment at the GSI. Yeah, I have recognized there are things beyond our current framework of material science that we have. Because when you touch the edge of the science and then try to push it a little bit forward, there's a point that you leave the boundaries of the known science, see stuff that you're sure that the level of our understanding of our current framework of science lacks a lot and leaves a lot to be. So I was convinced to look for more. Yeah.
But I pay attention to quantum sensing, mostly brain-computer interfaces. I would like to see the intersection of quantum computers using quantum information from quantum sensors over quantum
I recognize, okay, in our material framework, whatever we cannot prove or detect or measure, we immediately put them in a non-scientific category. But nowadays, as our technologies advance, especially in sensing, because as I've said, I have the idea that sensing opens new doors for us. As we advance in our technology, as we advance in our computational power, as we advance in our manufacturing, we have started detecting signals that previously was not possible.
Entangled Health. It's an intriguing name, isn't it? It brings to mind overlapping and intercorrelated fields, and also what is entangled. So I looked it up. According to the Oxford Dictionary, it means caused to become twisted together with or caught in. So I can imagine overlapping and interdependent scientific fields, a nice colored graph, if you may. But then if you ask what is entangled, we can also ask what is health. So I looked this up as well. As defined by the World Health Organization, I quote, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This definition emphasizes that health is more than just the absence of illness. It encompasses a positive state of being across multiple dimensions.
Gabriela is describing the real frontier now, not building the technology, but building the system that delivers it. That system has to bridge quantum physics and patience. It has to bridge venture capital and clinical evidence. It has to bridge individual healing and collective health. Entangled Health isn't a metaphor anymore. It's a description of the actual work that has to happen.
It was always a hacking mindset with, I guess the driving force was, what if? Let's just do it. Make shit happen. And being always, I think two things that drove my mindset. One is try to be the stupidest person in the room. Many people tries to be the smartest one, right? I think it should be the other way around. You have to surround yourself with people that are smarter and more intelligent than you. And then number two is be brave. And so sometimes you're just outside of your comfort zone, doing something that you're definitely not prepared to. But Halls, yeah, let's go and do it, and things will happen.
Today we tried something different, an experiment within the experiment. Instead of meeting one guest and diving in deep into their work, you heard woven voices from earlier conversations around a single thread that keeps emerging across disciplines. The idea was simple but radical. Maybe the best answers to the biggest questions don't come from one expert, but from the entanglement itself, from connections between fields, minds, and ways of seeing the same problem. And this was only a snapshot. We haven't even heard from all 13 guests yet. But as I do my digesting walk here, I just got another idea. Why not inviting you to submit your director's cut? So feel free to download the hours of material and just prepare something that is fitting to you. And I'll be really keen to listen to your perspective. So what's coming out, what you make out of the raw material, what ideas you generate. That would be cool. Yeah, let's see. Ciao. Yeah, dear friends, we are now entangled. Thanks for listening and for being part of this experiment at the intersection of quantum tech and health. If today's conversation sparked an idea, a critique, or triggered a question, please share it, and maybe your question is selected in a future episode out of the growing pool. And you know the game. If you like it, please subscribe, leave a rating, and entangle further by passing this episode to someone you think should join the gang. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep exploring the unseen with Entangled Health.